These are vinyl decals I made using my Silhouette Cameo and Silhouette Studio Designer Edition. If you have a Silhouette Cameo and you're looking to make your own vinyl cut decals, let me show you step by step how I went about making these decals start to finish, from setting up in Silhouette Studio all the way up to applying transfer tape to your finished decals so they're ready to apply. And with that, let's get started. Before you get started, let's go ahead and make sure everything is set up in Silhouette Studio. I am using Designer Edition, and you can see I have the program opened up. Make sure you have the latest version downloaded, whether you're using Basic, Designer, or whichever iteration you have. And now, so you can see when you open it up, I have what looks like a cutting mat. This is a virtual representation of your cutting mat. When the white area here is what would be the cuttable area. And so right now we are in the page setup, and if you look off to the right here in a column format, which is the default setting for mine, I have the page setup page setup menu here, and that's just this folded paper looking icon here. Now you notice that yours might have some grid lines on there. I like to turn mine off, and you can do that in the page setup menu here, this grid looking icon here, and you can click the show grid or turn it off, and then you can adjust the grids if you need to. I, for one, just like to turn off initially if I'm doing stuff like this, simply because with this on here it looks really busy, and as you start to try to do items, all these lines can kind of get in the way. You can always turn them on back later, so I like to go ahead and just have those off. So in the design area setup, which is the folded paper looking icon here, you'll see 1, 2, and 3. And so the first one is your machine. So make sure you select the appropriate machine. If you're using one of the different versions, I'm using a Cameo 3, so I will just select cut Cameo. Now, we are going to be doing this on a cutting mat, and so you can see for cutting mat, which is item 2, I select a 12 by 12 because that is what I have and what I'll be using. If you're using a different kind of cutting mat, different size, 12 by 24, an 8 by 12, etc., make sure you select the appropriate one. For this, we'll be doing it on a Cameo 12 by 12 cutting mat. And then your media size, again, because you're using a 12 by 12 cutting mat, I just selected to auto, which is 12 by 12. If you're using something different, go ahead and put that in as appropriate if you need to. Again, 12 by 12, since that's the cutting mat that we're using. Below this, you can see the size of the area that will be the media, and so you got the width and height, and since again everything is 12 and 12, transparency we don't have to worry about, orientation we don't have to worry about because right now everything is in a square. Rotation, I just like to leave right now as regular, and this is kind of how you would see things typically. This arrow button right here indicates the top of the cutting mat, is basically how you would feed the mat into the cutting machine, your Cameo, this way pointing up. And then we're not printing anything for this video, so we don't need to show the print border, but we do need to show the cut border, or at least I like to show the cut border. And if I turn it off, you can see there was a red line here in your cutting mat, virtual cutting mat representation. If you click that on, and basically that's just a warning or a border line to make sure that you don't have any graphics that are outside of this red line, because they will not get cut. We're not going to be doing print bleed because we're not printing anything, and so this will essentially ensure that you are set up for cutting in this particular format with your Cameo 3. And so once you have all this stuff set up, let's go ahead and get started with making your designs that you can cut out into decals. So let's say you wanted to make a simple decal that is just some words, as you can see here that I have off to the side. And so this is probably the simplest and most easy decals to start with. There's no tracing involved or anything like that. It's simply just typing a text that your machine will then cut out. And so in order to do that, what I like to do is, right now we are in the page setup area menu over here. And so on the right, what I like to do is I will click over here, the A with a bar next to it, and that's your text style panel. Click that, and then your text style menu will come up. And so, for example, for this dad wagon here in this font style, what you'll want to do is you'll want to pick your font, and in your text style, all the fonts that are loaded on your computer right now that your Silhouette Studio can see will show up in here as well. And so this particular font I know is one called Magneto. And so what I'll do is to make it faster, I can just type in Magneto, or start to type in Magneto, and it should find it. Click Magneto. All right, so now my Magneto font is selected, and then on the left side column here, where this A is, you're going to change your cursor, which is right now an arrow looking cursor. You'll click that and you'll see that now it is a kind of like a bar or a weird looking eye. I'm going to click in and you see this blinking, looks like a type cursor. And then this is where then you would type in your words that you want for your decal. And so I'm just going to type in dad wagon. Okay, so now you see it's in a green box right now, and that means with the blinky thing, that means it's still in its typable function. When you're done, if you just click anywhere out, it's not a typable function anymore until you try to grab it. It'll just move around like an item or an object. Now, if you want to make edits, just go into it so you see the little finger and then double click, and then it'll go back into that, and then you can type some more, delete, make whatever edits you want. I do want to warn you that in some fonts, and I'll zoom in here a little bit, I'll make this a little bit bigger, and I will zoom in as well. You'll see that right here, this O cuts into the N. And so if we send this to cut as it is, now each of the red lines of the letters is where your machine will cut. So it'll cut this O out like this, and then it'll go to cut the end, but it's already cut in here. And so your N's going to have, when you look at it, you'll see the cut line in your N. And if we zoom in even closer, let me zoom up or scroll up here and to the right. If we look at where the G touches the O, there's actually a small piece of the G that gets into the O, as you can see right here. And so there's a little triangle. So as this G is being cut by your machine, then your O gets cut. There, you'll see in the O, there's this little itty bitty bit here that will be cut into your O. So let me go ahead and put this back to regular size. And so if you don't want that to happen, you want this where the letters are touching or overlapping, you want it to be one solid, if you will, decal. What you're going to have to do is a function called weld these pieces together, so that when it cuts it, it doesn't cut into there, it just cuts the outer edges of everything. And so select your item, so just like this, and you don't want it to be this right here, you just want it to be one click and select that, and then you'll go up to the top where I have my other functions, and this one you want to hit weld selected shapes into one shape. Boom. And so now what it did is, you'll notice that where it kind of overlapped into each other, and I'll scroll up here and over where the O was, it got rid of that overlap and just basically welded everything together, so that when your machine cuts, it just cuts along these outer edges. You notice that in the G, it's open now where it went in before. So as your machine is cutting, imagine the little finger is the blade cutting. Instead of going in, out, and then going over like this, it would just follow, and then cut over without cutting into the next letter. Now, once you do that, however, it is no longer, if you double click it, it will not be, you cannot edit the type itself. So if you say that you misspelled it and you've done this already, you'll have to edit undo a bunch of times to get back to the function where it is now editable as a typable item, or you'll just have to retype it itself. Okay, so when this did weld this, if I highlight over the whole area, you'll see that essentially anything that wasn't touching is its own little item. And so like the D wasn't touching any other letters, so now it's its own independent item. The A and the D, they were slightly touching, so they have now been welded together, so it's its own independent item. The W is the same, and then everything here that was touching, so they were their own independent items. And so in order for them to stay together the way it is in this line here, is you'll want to select everything by highlighting over all, and you can see that the boxes are capturing what are the independent items, and then you'll want to group them together. And so if you go up into the additional functions here, you can group this function right here, group selected shapes, and boom, now it's one item. And then if you need to make some adjustments, you can ungroup them. So for example, if you wanted to maybe stagger this like this for some stylistic purposes, if you wanted, you could do something like that and then group them. And now it's its own thing. But if you just wanted it to be one cuttable item like this instead of a bunch of independent items that you could accidentally grab and move around inadvertently and misalign, I suggest that you would group them. And so let's make this one here real quick. This is an even simpler one. So I know this font is called Army. And so what I'm going to go back to here is click my textile panel. I'm going to select Army, which actually it's already on right now. Select, type, and Dad Wagon. All right. And so you can see here that I don't have to worry about welding because none of the letters are touching together itself. And so when it sends to cut, it cuts each of these things independently as it would typically for what you want. And I can move it around as its own item because it is its own item. That's how the font is. And the reason why these are colored and these aren't, by default, you can see that it does it in this hollow with the red lines. If you wanted to color it just so you can see it more easily, you can just highlight whatever one you want colored and then go to, on the right, go to this paint palette looking icon here, which is your fill panel. Click that and then pick a color that you want it. And it just does sometimes make it a little bit easier to see versus this thin red lines on a white background. And then it would be even busier if you had the grid lines on there as well. And now keep in mind though that since we're cutting vinyl decals, that doesn't mean that it's going to cut this as a black decal. But this is just a representation on the screen. What we'll actually cut is the outer edges of here. If I uncolor this, it'll be hollow. So all the red lines are what's going to be cut. And so if you put yellow vinyl on your cutting mat, then it'll just cut out a yellow dad wagon, even if you have this colored in black. So that's just something to make sure that everybody understands we're all on the same page, that just because you color it black doesn't mean it's going to cut black. It's going to cut what the shape of whatever you did on the color of vinyl that you did. All right, and so now let's say you want to make several of these items here. First of all, I would say make sure you have it sized the way you want, and you can resize it with this corner button here, or you can, which if you do by the corner, it will do the adjustments by a relative ratio. It'll adjust the height and the width accordingly to keep it from stretching or shrinking otherwise. But maybe you want that effect, you want it to be taller, so you would grab one of these top ones here, the top or the bottom one, and pull straight up and down. Or maybe you want it to stretch because you want the font to be a little bit wider looking, if you will. Then you just grab one of these side corner ones here. The other way to do this is you can lock or keep unlocked the aspect ratio. So if you want it to be sized relative height to width, you would lock the aspect ratio. And then let's say you want this to be no taller than 1 inch total. So now I would just do 1 inch. I would type in, highlight, and then type in 1 inch here. Hit enter, and then it will automatically size the width accordingly. And in this case, just under 6.5 inches at 6.445. And so that's handy to know. So if you say, hey, somebody wants you to make them a dad wagon decal, but it has to fit in a space that is, only 1.25 inches tall, then you know that if you make it about 1 inch, it should fit in there without any issues. Okay, and so let's say you want to make several of these on this one 12 by 12 sheet, and let's say I want them no longer than 1 inch or no taller than 1 inch. I can then click my item, hold your control button down, and if you hold your control button down, it looks like there's a pen that shows up, and I'm going to put it below this. So if I click my down arrow, it just automatically copies and send a copy below it. If I click my right arrow while holding my control button, it'll shoot a copy off to my right. And so make as many copies as you want so you can get it set up. And so what I'll do here is I will just do, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 of these versions here. Okay, and then I'm going to actually try to arrange and space them so it's easier for me when I cut apart the decals after cutting the actual decals. When I cut them physically to hand out as individual decals, I have space to cut in between. And so that's something to consider when you do that. So what you can do is you can try to manually space them, but what I like to do is I would like to kind of get them about where the spacing that I want, and then I will highlight all of these, and then I will go here and align everything first, and then I can then use these spacing functions where I can space vertically, and it'll basically just even out the spaces in between each of your decals. And so now when I take a scissor or whatever and cut out the actual decal apart and not what these here where your machine will cut, I have space to be able to do that. And so for here, let's say I want to replicate a couple of these here as well. Say I want to make 4 of these. I'm going to kind of space these out, the size, the distance I want, and then I'm going to highlight all of them and then vertically space them, and then I want to align them as well, so that's a little easier. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit more space in between each of these here. And then I'm going to align everything to the left and then even out the spacing between each one so that when I cut these apart, I have adequate space to do so. All right, so now let's just say I want to make these 4 and these 4 on my sheet of vinyl. So I've got this arranged, and I'm going to go over to send. And then what I want to do is it may look like it's really super thick and kind of like pixelated. So what I want to do is I want to highlight what items I want cut. And then right now it's select to cut edge, but I actually just want to hit regular cut. And then you'll see that the thick red edges, the red lines are not as thick anymore, and it will cut. And then make sure that under material on this side here, that you select the type of material that you're going to use. I'm using Oracal 651, and I have found that the settings for vinyl glossy work just fine, and that puts it at a blade depth of 1 with a force of 10 and a speed of 5. Now your machine may vary, and also the type of vinyl that you use, you may have to make adjustments, and so there are a whole lot of presets here. I like to use, and just from a little bit of experience, I know that vinyl glossy works just fine with Oracal 651 on my particular machine. You may have to do a test run, and maybe you might have to adjust the force, you might have to adjust the blade depth, you may have to slow it down or speed it up if you want to. You may have to do a couple tests is the bottom line there. And so once you have that dialed in, what you want to make sure is you select cut and not sketch, because we are cutting, we're not sketching anything. And then select under tool the appropriate type of blade that you have inserted in your tool number 1 slot on your Cameo machine. In this case, I am using an auto blade, so I have auto blade selected. Under here, this is just the settings for the blade itself, which I briefly described earlier. And once you have everything set, you can go ahead and make sure that your cutting mat is loaded with vinyl. And make sure you do it the same here. Make sure that your vinyl, you have enough vinyl to so your machine will cut big enough that's big enough so that it will capture all your decals. So let's say you don't want to use a full 12 by 12 sheet. Just make sure that the height in this case will be 12 because it's filling up top to bottom pretty good, and that your sheet that you load to your Cameo is wide enough to capture everything on this area. And that's just a way to save some vinyl as necessary. And so when you do that though, make sure your vinyl is in the area, the same area relative on the virtual mat as it is on the physical mat itself. And when you're ready to go ahead and click your send button once you have everything loaded up in your Cameo, and then your machine will start cutting. So let's say you want to make decals that are off of an image that has already been created, and so you download something off the internet, or one is provided to you that somebody wants you to make a vinyl cut decal for them from their image. And so you can see I have an example here off to the left of my virtual cutting mat, and it's for a business logo of a friend of mine whose business is organic archery, and he makes handcrafted longbows and arrows, primitive bows and primitive arrows. Beautiful craftsman work. Anyway, made a bunch of decals for him a little while ago, and this is the image that he provided to me to use to cut out the decals. Anyway, so what you can see is most of the image, or a lot of times of image, if you don't get a PNG with a transparent background, they will be the image itself on a white square or rectangle background itself. And so if you try to cut that as is, let's say, oh, I got my image, it's high contrast, so it's black and white and it's easy to cut out. I'll put it on my virtual cutting mat. I'll go to send. I'm going to click my item to be cut, and I'm getting ready to cut, so I'm going to hit cut to select it, and wait a second, it's got only a red line around the square of the background. And so if I go ahead and hit send down here at the button, the only thing that's going to cut is a square. And so you'll have your sheet of vinyl on your mat, and then it'll go to cut it, and you're just going to cut out a square. And the reason being is because it's your Silhouette Studio is looking for the image, and right now the image is essentially to the program just a square, but what your eyes see is this, and that's what you want cut. So you have to identify to Silhouette Studio what of the image that it's seeing here, the square plus everything in here, but it only recognizes a square right now as a cuttable file or a cuttable item. You want it to cut this actual image here in the center of the whole image. And so to do that, what you'll do is if you're in your page setup on where your icon buttons are, default typically in a column to the right, click on this button here that looks like a butterfly, and it's this one right here, and it's the trace panel. So if you click that, your menu now changes over to your trace menu, and by default it has just this trace function set up. There's a couple other ways to do it: trace by color, or you can magnet trace where you can try to drop lines around this, but I found that just simply the default trace function works most of the time for like 95% of anything I've ever done. That being said, once you hit this or make sure that's selected, click your select trace area, and it will change your mouse clicker arrow into a crosshair, as you can see here on my virtual cutting mat. What you want to do is you'll click your left mouse button off to the side somewhere and hold, and then you can now draw and size a square, rectangle, whatever. And what you want to do in the gray area square that it creates is cover up the entire image that you want traced, so it captures everything inside of what you want traced. When you let go of your mouse button, your computer is going to think about it for a little bit because it's trying to scan and identify what might be something that's cuttable, traceable, and it will highlight it in yellow, as you can see here. Now this one, because it's a high contrast with sharp lines, black on white with sharp lines, it was easy for the program to identify. If you have things that are like shades of gray, kind of blurry, it might be a little bit more difficult. And so you may have to work with some of the settings here to change to get it to recognize parts of the image that you do want cut out. So basically everything in yellow is recognizing as an image that could be potentially cuttable. If you need to fine tune some of the settings of it capturing more of that image, you can start by adjusting the threshold here as I'm doing here. So if I drop it to say like 94, what you'll see here happening in a second as the computer thinks about it, it'll kind of look like it's getting filled in even more. I'm waiting for my computer to catch up. So if I drop it to 100, you can see how kind of full in it is, and it's basically trying to fill in everything. It's capturing more than it should. If I go too low, I'm not going to get enough. So let me try to get down to, let's just say, I don't know. I think the default was 45, but here it looks like it might be missing some items. But at 45, which is what I think it did originally, it seems to capture everything. And again, tweak it if you need to. You can zoom in a little bit more to make sure that the fine details are captured as necessary. You can adjust the speckle threshold on here, and what that does is it makes some adjustments, and you can see it captures some more finite detail. I usually don't have to mess with that, but you can adjust it as necessary. Your high pass will basically try to fine tune it as well, and so you can see it's trying to isolate different items here. But for the most part, I have not really had to mess with some of the other ones. Mostly just the threshold is what I've had to mess with. So let me fit this back to window. Okay, and so now I'm let's say you've done all the tweaks that you want to do and everything is highlighted that I want captured. You then would just hit, in this case, trace. It's going to think about it for a second, and now the gray window disappears, and now your image is covered in, not covered, but has all these red lines. And what its red lines are is what your computer is now showing as a cuttable line for when you send it to be cut. And what it did was, I'm going to grab right in the middle of the image and move the image away. And so the whole image is here still intact, white background, black image. And then here is what your computer recognized, Silhouette Studio recognized as a cuttable, traceable image that you can then cut into a vinyl decal. So if you're happy with how it looks, cool, you can proceed. If not, maybe go ahead and retrace it again and do some more tweaks until you get it how you want. And then here, I'm happy with this image as it is. The next thing to do, if you're good with it, you can go ahead and resize it by pulling one of the corner arrow or the corner box buttons here, and what it does is it adjusts the size proportionally. If you It'll adjust the size and the height proportionally. If you grab one of these middle ones, you can see I'm moving up and down, but then it kind of skews it a little bit. So I'm going to put that back to its original, and same thing with left and right, it'll kind of stretch it out. And so generally speaking, if you're going to resize it, you grab one of the corner boxes and adjust the size there, or what you can do is with your item highlighted on here, you can lock the aspect ratio. So right now it shows us an unlocked padlock. If you click that, it will lock it. And so let's say you know that you only want this decal to be no wider than, it has to fit in a 5-inch wide space. And so what you could do is, knowing that you only have a 5-inch wide space that you want to fit in, I would recommend the width of being something smaller. So let's say 4.5 inches or 4.5 inches. Type that in, and then you can see it adjusted the image and proportionally adjusted the height down to 5.047 inches. All right, and so this is ready to send to cut, but if you want to make more than one, again, this is a virtual representation of your cutting mat. This white area is where you would load your vinyl, pretend that's your sheet of vinyl on your physical cutting mat. So let's say I wanted to cut out four of these decals in this particular size. What you can do is select your item, you can hold down your control button, hit C, and then hold your control button again, hit V, and that's copy paste, and then you can move it. Another hack is hold your control button and then press one of your directional arrows. So I'll press the down arrow while I'm holding my control button, and you can see it'll make a copy and shoot it below it. And then, or you can do it the other way, where you can do file, edit, copy. So I've now copied it, click off to the side somewhere, and then edit, and then you can do paste, and it'll drop another image, and then you can move it to where you want. And if you want to align this a little bit better, you can select, let's say you want these to be vertically aligned better, left justified, these two to be right justified. So all I'm doing is highlighting the two by drawing a box over it. It captures the two, and then going into my alignment function, which is these, looks like bar graphs here, and then you can align them however you want. Let's say you wanted to align them on the horizontal plane, and these ones I wanted to align across I want the tops to be lined up, so I click that option, and here in the bottom I want the bottoms to be lined up, and I do that. And the reason why you would do something like that and then arrange this is for when you, let's say you cut out all 4 decals on a 12 by 12 sheet. Now you have plenty of space to cut down the middle, and plenty of space to cut across the middle, so that you can cut out 4 separate decals to give or sell. All right, so now that I have this set up and it's good to go, what I want to do is go ahead and click send, and it'll go over to your cutting menu here, and I like to make sure that everything is highlighted and selected that I want to have cut, and you can see boxes around each one of these. And now the cut option has been selected. Now I will be cutting this on Oracal 651 craft vinyl, and so I have found that the preset cut settings of a vinyl glossy work just fine on my particular machine, my Cameo 3, with its presets of the cutting for the blade, and that's a depth of 1 with a force of 10 at a speed of 5. Now, depending on, you might be using a different kind of vinyl, so you might want to check the manufacturer if they have any recommended settings as far as depth, force, or speed for the Cameo, or whatever machine you have, the 2, 3, 4, the Pro, etc., etc. But I have found that for Oracal 651, generally speaking, the preset settings for vinyl glossy work just fine. Make sure that you are selecting on cut and not sketch, and then the appropriate blade that you have. And I am using the auto blade, which I have loaded in my tool 1, and my tool 2 I have my ratchet blade loaded, but right now we are electing in this case to utilize tool 1, which is in the red circle. Tool 2 will be the blue circle. Okay, so assuming you have everything set here, the next thing to do is basically make sure that your physical cutting mat is loaded with a sheet of vinyl that is 12 by 12 on your physical cutting mat, get it loaded into your Silhouette Cameo, and then go ahead and hit send, and it will send to cut these decals out. All right, so now that you're ready to go and cut out your vinyl decals themselves, it's time to get your cutting mat set up with your vinyl placed on it appropriately for how you are intending to do this. So you can see here's my physical cutting mat, and it's gridded out. Now this is a NICAPA brand, it's not the Silhouette brand. I bought these as replacement ones. They're a little cheaper, and I found that they work just as well so far. Anyway, it's gridded out in 1x1 inch squares, and this is where you might go ahead and turn your grid back on so that you could place your graphics on different areas and use the grid on the virtual cutting mat to place things, and then you can place your vinyl appropriately. But let's just say that you are going to do the same image or multiple images, but you're going to cut it out on one big sheet all in the same color. Then the easiest thing to do would take a 12-inch by 12-inch sheet. This one's already been pre-cut. I ordered it from Amazon at Oracal 651. It was just in a multi-colored sample pack, so they're already pre-cut. But if you bought a long bulk, you can cut a 12-inch by 12-inch square and do the same thing. And so what you would do is just place it on. And I always recommend once you place it on, at least lightly squeegee it onto it. You don't have to go super crazy, but you don't want this to be loose, and it would pop up while your machine is cutting. And so that way you can cut all the different graphics, or a single graphic with just multiples of it in one sheet if you are making multiple images or graphics of the same color. Now let's say you wanted to do just a single graphic, and you don't want to have to use an entire sheet because it's a smaller graphic. You can pre-cut something out, and then what you would do on your virtual cutting mat in Silhouette Studio is place it within the grid when you turn the grid back on, and you can place it in a certain area. So let's say we wanted an image that's maybe 2 inches by 2 inches square. This piece of vinyl here is 3 inches tall by 5 inches wide, so very, very big, very sufficient for cutting out a 2 by 2 inch graphic. And let's just say I know it's a 2 by 2 inch. I know the size of my piece of vinyl that I want to use. So I'm going to place the graphic in the virtual cutting mat in this little area right here. Probably the 2 by 2, center it there. And then I can place just this piece of vinyl right here. And so make sure that you are placing the actual physical vinyl in the area of your or the graphic on your virtual cutting mat. And so that way you can just use a smaller piece of vinyl without wasting or using an entire sheet, and it creates a little bit less mess, it's a little bit less hassle, and it's a little bit faster. Now let's say you wanted to create multiple different graphics of different colors, and you didn't want to do one, peel this off, put another color on, peel it off, put another color on. You could actually set up your physical cutting mat to be able to cut multiple colors at the same time. And it's the same principle on your virtual cutting mat. You want to place your graphics on your virtual cutting mat, and then place the different color of vinyl that you want appropriately on the cutting mat in the grid, using the grid area to reference where you would actually place them. So in the previous example, I had a smaller graphic right here. Let's say I wanted to cut 2 other graphics in orange. I'll just place them here and here. And then let's say I wanted a green one below to cut out a green graphic. And so you could set up multiple colors and chunks of vinyl on your cutting mat so that you can cut different graphics in different colors on one cutting mat all at the same time. And so again, you would just make sure that your graphic would fit on your virtual cutting mat and your physical cutting mat in the areas where you are placing the actual vinyl on your physical cutting mat. And so set up your cutting mat according to how you place your graphics on your virtual cutting mat, and it will cut out accordingly. So now that we've got our cutting mat all set up with the vinyl in the way we want to get it set up for cutting out our graphics, let's get our cutting mat loaded into our Cameo. I'm using a Cameo 3, which is what I have here. And you can see I've got a couple things already set up. Now I have this set up right here, which is for the cutting mat setting right here for default. And if I was not using cutting mat, I would move this over here. I kind of just move these towards the center to kind of keep things just kind of even pressure in the middle. I did extend out this tray and added or extended the little arms here, and what that does is it just adds a little bit extra support on the mat while it is in the system. And so to do this, basically take your cutting mat, this is the top, Make sure that you're orienting this the proper way according to your virtual cutting mat. And then on the left edge, you have a guideline there. And then you can see that this wheel is lined up against this edge there. And then that this edge is lined up with this wheel there. And I kind of just give it a little bit of a push so that it's set in even pressure against both of those wheels. Now, once I have that set, I'm going to go ahead and hit load, and the machine will suck it in. Now, sometimes what I like to do is I will go ahead and hit the little arrow move button on the menu, and I'll move this to make sure that the entire length of this, that the cutting mat is properly lined, then it's not slightly kinked and will come off during the cutting process. And so you can see that the entire length of where the vinyl would be cut, the mat is fully mounted into the wheels, and it's not going to slide off during the cutting process. Just something that you take a couple extra seconds to make sure that your project goes smoothly and there's no hiccups and nothing goes wrong with it. And so now that I know this is set and ready to go, I would go back to Silhouette Studio and go ahead and hit the send button, so that it'll send the signal to your Cameo and it will start cutting. So once you hit send on your Silhouette Design Studio, your Cameo will start to do some adjustments if you are using the auto blade, as you saw it making adjustments to the blade. And once it's all set, it will start cutting, as you can see it doing in the video here. So let it finish up, and then the next step will be weeding. So here you can see I've got a bunch of decals that I've cut out now. Some of them are images, some of them are the word decals. But anyway, so I just followed the process that I showed you in the earlier part of the video on how to do this. And so the next step is to weed out the excess vinyl around your images. And so I'll just take one of these and show you how that's done. So to weed out the vinyl, you'll need something that you can basically use to kind of poke and pull vinyl pieces up, particularly in between images areas like the inside of this A here of this particular graphic. And so my preferred tool is to use a craft style hobby knife. Here I have a basic X-Acto style knife with a standard looking blade. But here I actually like to use this one instead. This is Vivid's Precision Glide knife. It does use a standard X-Acto style blade, but I like it because I can pull the blade back in when I'm not using it. Say for example, I picked out what I need and now I'm just going to peel off the rest. I don't like having just an exposed blade out and about. So having this type of knife here is handy because I can then put the blade back and I don't risk cutting myself if I accidentally leave it on the table and put my hand down on it or something like that. Also, having an X-Acto knife, part of the reason why I like having an X-Acto knife is because I can actually cut if I need to cut certain parts of the vinyl just to make the weeding process a bit easier. I know some folks like to use just basically like picking tools, like a sharp dental instrument or something to that effect. But that you can't actually cut the vinyl at the same time. When you have a fresh or a new blade, this has a very sharp point to it, but also a very sharp blade, so you can cut the vinyl if necessary. And so the way I like to do this is I will typically take the knife and then take the point of it. And so I'm going to dig out the center of this O right here, and I'll just stick the point of the knife into the vinyl just a little bit and then pull it up just like that. I'll stick it to my finger. Here's another part here, sticking the point into the vinyl. It's into the vinyl just a touch, just enough to get in there, and then digging it up. Now this is an easy one because it's just a bunch of letters, so if I can peel this off here, but let's say it starts getting a little bit crazy here and it's too much at one time being peeled off, that's when you can take the knife and you can cut chunks of the vinyl away. And that way you can make it a little bit easier by releasing certain parts of the vinyl so not so much is coming up all at one time while you're trying to peel. So for example, if you have too much coming up, and it might actually drop back down onto parts of your vinyl that you don't want peeled and ruin the weeding process. This one's not so bad. It's fairly easy because it is just lettering. So if you're careful about it, keeping the vinyl up and off of itself once you peel it, generally speaking, you should be pretty safe without the vinyl falling back down on itself, because it does like to grab to itself, and if it does, you might pull up your actual graphic that you don't want to be weeded out. Okay, so now again with the knife, I just like to put my piece there on my hand or my finger just because it's fast and easy. Just stack it on top of each other, it sticks to itself pretty well. And so just kind of pick and flick it up a little bit, pick, flick it up a little bit, pick, flick it up a little bit, put the weeded vinyl on your finger or somewhere where you can kind of keep it out of the way so it doesn't fall back onto your graphic. So again, just picking, and I'm just trying to get the vinyl into the, just into and under the knife, just into and under the surface of the vinyl, so that way I can then lift it up. It takes a little bit of practice, but once you get the feel for it, you can get pretty quick and pretty proficient at it. As you see, I just did that in just probably less than a minute there. So that last one that was just letters was a pretty easy one. So what about something that's a little bit more detailed or difficult? Something like this this badging from the Harry Potter series for the Slytherin. I recommend when you do an image, you actually have your reference image so you know what parts you need to weed out and which ones you don't, because sometimes you might actually weed out the wrong part and then destroy the vinyl. Then you'll have to recut the sticker or the decal. So with this, it's basically the same thing. So I just want to find parts that I'm going to weed out, find it, and then pick it and pull it up. Carefully start pulling it up. Make sure that you peel kind of slowly in case your blade didn't cut all the way through, so you don't pull off, like in this case, some of the letters that do need to stay. And so something like that I was able to get pretty easily. There are going to be some very small parts to some of your decals depending on how small you make them and how much detail they have in there. So you're just really going to have to take your time and just kind of be persistent at it. Again, having a reference image is always good to have so that you don't peel out the wrong parts. Sometimes when you have very small parts embedded within another small part of the graphic itself, they can stick together. So kind of take a look for that, knowing what your image is supposed to look like. So for example, this eyeball here is pretty small. It could have easily come off with this part here. But once you get it started, if you're careful about it and take your time, just don't rush doing this when you have lots of small details, you'll be fine. And then, so for example, here there's an eyeball part. So just take that point of the knife and stick it right in that little eyeball, and there it is right there. So I'll finish this up so you can see the process of doing something that's a little bit more detailed, but I'll speed this up. And so there you have it as far as weeding out a graphic that might have a little bit more detail to it. As you can see in this particular one, there were some pretty thin pieces here that it's had to be careful to weed out, but also leave parts that may have been in between, like for example, again, that eyeball there, and then maybe some of these thinner parts that you didn't necessarily want to pull out. So again, having a sharp X-Acto knife with a fine point is good for getting the point in there, boom. And you might have seen in the time lapse where I had actually cut this here a little bit so I could just peel off and around instead of the whole thing trying to come out, which risks accidentally maybe perhaps the vinyl touching parts of this and pulling off parts of the other vinyl. So once you have your decals all cut out, you need to put some transfer tape onto the front surface of it so that you can apply it to whatever surface you intend to apply your decal to. Here I have one that's done as an example already using transfer paper. And so you can see that I've applied it onto the graphic itself, and now I can peel this off, and then whatever I want to, I will apply this onto whatever surface that I'm going to apply this decal to. And so I have two different types here. You may hear transfer paper, which is this type here. It is an actual paper product with an adhesive on the back. And then you have what people refer to as transfer tape. In the vinyl wrap industry, we call this pre-mask. It's basically a clear-ish plastic transfer paper or tape, in this case that's plastic and clear that you can see through it, but it does the exact same thing as transfer paper. It's just one you can see through, one is a little bit harder to see through. So I'll show you a demonstration of how I applied the transfer paper to this, and then how applying the transfer tape to another graphic as well. So you can see for this I have a piece of transfer tape already sized out that's slightly bigger and will fully cover the graphic that I'm going to be applying the transfer tape onto, which is this one here. Now I do have this one, a piece of tape just rolled over on its side, so this doesn't move around on me when I try to apply the transfer tape onto this. And so basically I just make sure that the piece, or double check that the piece is going to be big enough to fit. Then you can go ahead, and I like to just go ahead and peel off. If it's something small like this, I'll just go ahead and peel off the whole amount. Unfurl it if it curls up on you, and then I kind of just eyeball center it over, and then I'll let the center drop down over the center of the graphic, kind of like what we see me doing here. So I'll just eyeball it like this, and then I'll kind of form like a U. to drop the center down over the center, and I'll let that U at the bottom of the U touch, and then just kind of roll out to the sides, just really lightly, nothing too crazy. And then once you have that down, you'll want to have a squeegee of some sort so that you can then press down the transfer tape onto your graphic. And I'm using my hard edge right now because I do have some Teflon tape on here. If you don't have that, that's fine. It should slide fairly well. And then you want to make sure that you press your transfer tape very firmly onto your graphic so that transfer tape will adhere to the vinyl, so that when you peel off the transfer tape later on, that it takes all of your graphic with it. So now I'm just going to, since I do have a little bit excess stuck to my surface here, I'm just going to peel this off. Okay, now you see I have a little bit of excess all the way around, so I'm just going to trim that off. Handy pair of scissors, like that. Trim some of this off just so when you do go to apply this, or if you're storing it, the adhesive is not just grabbing onto random things around. And you can kind of see that when I did apply this, I tried to keep the line straight on this, so it just makes it for when you apply it to this graphic to something else, whatever you're going to do it. If you're trying to level it or make it plumb to something, it makes it a little bit easier to go ahead and do that when you have these grid lines here. All right, so just take the tape off the back that I had holding it onto the surface. So now this decal, this vinyl decal, is ready to be applied to whatever surface. When I peel this off, you can see that it's going to take the graphic with it. So when you peel it off, and then you would just apply your graphic onto whatever surface you're going to apply this graphic to. So that is applying transfer paper to a vinyl decal. Now I'll show you some demonstration with the other types of transfer tapes that I have available here, or that are available as well. So now I'll show you how to apply transfer tape to a graphic. So I have it on my roll here, and so I'm going to, this is a big roll. It does come in, this is a 12-inch tall roll by like 100 feet, I think, of what I originally bought. But they do come in smaller rolls that are like 6 inches wide versus this full foot. So I'll have a lot of excess here. So basically I'm just going to peel out enough that's going to be big enough that I know will cover my graphic. Once I know I have an amount that's going to be sufficient to cover it, I then need to cut this off so that I'll have the transfer tape available. So I'm just going to use my scissor, slide that off, cut that. So now I have a pretty excessively large piece, but that's okay. For this, if you want, you can trim it down. And then so again, I'm going to go ahead and do my technique where I kind of just do a U. Now I notice that this is bowing up a little bit, so I'm going to turn it this way so that my U doesn't prematurely touch on the outer sides in a opposite angle, if you will. So this will follow the curvature of the decal as it is. So I'm just going to do my U. I know I've got it plenty of transfer tape, and so I'm just going to drop that right over on top just like that, super light. Then I'm going to take my squeegee and then make sure that it's applied down really well over my graphic. Just putting some good firm force across the graphic, multiple directions, multiple passes. Okay, once I'm confident that I've done a pretty good job getting that down, I'm going to go ahead and trim off all this excess here. Like I said, you can get smaller sizes, or you can pre-cut this down a little bit if it's too much. So just trimming this off here. Trash. All right, and so now this decal is ready for application because it now has pre-mask or transfer tape on it that you can then peel the graphic off and then apply it to whatever surface you are intending to apply it to. Alright guys, so from start to finish, that is how you make vinyl cut decals on your Silhouette Cameo and Silhouette Design Studio. I've walked you through from start to finish, from creating the design or tracing design to cutting it and weeding it and applying transfer tape. And so I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. Got more videos in the works on the way that I'd love to share with you. Thanks again for watching guys, and have a great day.